Justin was a happy, happy baby, a happy little boy, always having fun. He just laughed. He was always fun to be with. He was a smart kid, always an A student. Things seemed to come easy to him. He had great friends. He was just a joy. He lit up a room. I mean, even his friends would say he had a permanent smile on his face. He had a glisten in his eyes. He just made people feel important. When he was a kid, he was a loving, smart, athletic child. He played football, volleyball, basketball. He just loved to be part of a team. He had a great group of friends. He knew he was loved. He was loved by his family and his friends. He just loved to work, and he loved to be good at things. I was proud of the person he had become.
One of the main questions that parents ask me is, when should I start talking to my kids and how specific should I be? And I think there's never an age that's too young to start talking about the dangers of drugs and alcohol.
When you're comfortable talking to your kids about drug and alcohol use, your kids will pick that up and they'll be more honest in talking to you. Once they trust you, they will tell you more than you want to know. And once they trust you, they will ask you anything. But that means that we have to get comfortable with some of the questions that young adults will ask.
Can I drink if my mom and dad are with me?
Are prescription drugs safer than street drugs?
Is vaping better than smoking?
Why is heroin addictive? What's an edible?
How old were you when you started drinking?
Are steroids drugs?
Isn't weed legal? So how can it be bad?
Is Molly a sex drug?
Have you ever tried drugs?
It's okay if they ask you everything, and it's okay if you don't have the answer. And if it's okay if you laugh because it's a kind of a crazy question. Those are all good things because young people will laugh with you. But it's a chance for you to say, here's what I know, let's look it up together. Sometimes I think we think that if we don't talk about it, it won't happen. Well, it happens. And we've learned the hard way for some generations that if your young people aren't comfortable talking about things, they're gonna get their information elsewhere.
It's so important for parents to give their kids the correct information about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. Because if the kids aren't getting their knowledge from you, they're gonna be getting it from other sources that aren't nearly as reliable. So you need to be the one providing them with the correct and accurate information.
Now she does the eye rolling, when you try to talk to her. I think it's important to try to meet kids where they're at.
Keeping a strong relationship with the kids, especially these days is tough because, as kids grow, a lot of them, they don't want to be with mom or dad. They just kind of want to be.
One of the reasons it's important to get comfortable talking to your kids about alcohol and drugs is that even though they may not be showing it to you all the time, especially adolescents, young people, kids, they care about the respect of their parents.
2/3 of teens say that losing their parents' respect and pride is one of the main reasons why they don't use drugs and alcohol. And that is a really encouraging statistic because that tells me that teens are actually listening and they care about what their parents think.
They'll never admit it. They'll never tell their parents that they value what their parents say or how they see them, but deep down, they really do. They really do care about respecting their parents. They really do care about the values of the family and their parents.
If they don't want to disappoint because they know that you don't want them to use drugs or alcohol, that's a powerful, persuasive argument for them not to use. So talk to your kids. Let them know that you don't want them to use drugs or alcohol until they get older, And that can be a protective device for them not using, because they really care what you think.
I am worried about him being exposed to the normalization of drinking.
My perspective changed here because I see beer here is like very normal, drinking beer every day, not in my country. So I have to understand the culture here too and how to talk about it.
Kids are already deciding by 3rd or 4th grade whether they will try alcohol in the future. And that doesn't mean that a 3rd grader is consciously making that decision, but they're being inundated with information every day, whether it's through the media, on radio, on TV, even just walking through a Target store and seeing a tank top that says rosé all day or something similar. Is sending a message to them about drugs and alcohol. We may not even realize that they're taking it in. So they are starting to think about these things.
At that early age, they're taking a look at the world around them, at the adults around them, and they're already starting to decide whether or not they want to try to do that. So that's why starting early about these conversations is important, because we want to be able to give our kids the freedom to ask questions when they see people using alcohol or tobacco.
I think you can talk to kids, but in a very simple way. 5-year-old kids, they don't need those deep conversations. You can explain something in a simple way. Kids can be exposed 9 to 10 to alcohol or any drug. So I think I will have to have the conversation really soon.
I think you should start talking to your kids about drugs and alcohol as early as possible, and obviously in an age-appropriate way, but as early as possible.
We don't want to wait until they're a certain age. We want it to be a continuing, ongoing dialogue that happens with adults and young people. But we also know that they are on social media and they are on different platforms and that they talk to each other. And so that's where we can start to get some misinformation. So again, I think it's important for who's ever providing as an adult this education and these conversations with young people to also make sure that they have some credible resources, that they can provide them with some specific websites or places to go where they can be fact-checked.
11 is the average age of the first illicit use of prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, and inhalants.
11. That's a 5th grader, just like me.
For many kids, their first exposure to substance use and risky use is right in their family's medicine cabinet. And that's because kids are curious, they're inquisitive, they're going to want to see what these medications do.
We see a number of kids who are going into grandma's medicine cabinet, their own household, taking used expired medicines and medicines that are readily available to other family members. Those drugs could cause harm. Dispose of those drugs properly at a prescription drug take-back location so grandma doesn't become a drug dealer.
For me, it started with prescription medication. I was prescribed opiates when I had a kidney infection, when I had my appendicitis, different small surgeries when I was younger, and I liked the way that made me feel. Once I started getting those, someone introduced me to stronger painkillers. When those stronger painkillers were no longer available, I was introduced to heroin, basically the same things as another opiate. And that's all it took for me to take it, and that was it. I had no idea what path I was gonna go down. My son was born addicted to opiates, so he was kind of the shining star that changed my life.
Parents don't know as much as they could in general because these are not topics that feel good to learn about when you're raising a child. We kind of have this false assumption, and kids magnify this, that if a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant writes for a medication, it must be safe. Well, that's not necessarily true. If something is prescribed for a 200-pound man and it gets a hold of by a 95-pound teenager, the effect of that medication is going to be very different.
If your doctor did not prescribe it and your pharmacist didn't fill it, don't take it, because it was not made for you. All of our kids are gonna play sports or do something where they're gonna may possibly get injured, maybe need surgery for something, maybe as simple as wisdom teeth being pulled. They need to be aware of what is going to be potentially prescribed to them, such as painkillers, opioid painkillers, how to manage that and start that conversation early on. I like to say that we need to be in some pain and not use these painkillers to get to an area where there's no pain. That we have seen leads to drug addiction, substance use disorder, and abuse later on.
90% of addiction starts in the teenage years. And the reason for that is because the teenage brain is still developing. And while that brain is developing, if these kids are introducing drugs and alcohol, it can make permanent changes to their brain before it's completely developed.
Keep in mind, young people's brains do not fully develop until they're at least in their mid-20s. The part of the brains that do develop earlier are at the brainstem. That's the part of our brain in the brainstem that controls urges, cravings, our drive to eat, to sleep, to procreate, to breathe, all those things that keep us alive. Now compare that to the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain that develops last. It doesn't develop until we're in at least our mid-20s. This is a part of the brain that controls executive function, the ability to tamp down urges, cravings, the ability to delay gratification. So that's why anyone who's ever raised an adolescent know that adolescents can be impulsive. They have a hard time sometimes saying no due to peer pressure, due to bullying. Adolescents don't have the ability to tamp down the urges or cravings. So if someone offers them a drug or alcohol during their adolescent years, it's sometimes harder to say no because the adolescents don't always have the part of the brain fully formed that allows them to see the consequences of those actions.
13 is the average age that a child first tries alcohol.
13? That's a middle schooler, just like me.
That seems so young to me, but is all the more reason why parents need to talk to their kids early about that, because by 6th or 7th grade, they're already going to be experimenting with alcohol.
We know that if someone starts using alcohol at that early age of 13, they're using it regularly, that young adult has an almost 50% chance of developing an alcohol use disorder as an adult. That's huge. Now, if we can delay that first onset until 21, they only have a 7% chance of developing an alcohol use disorder as an adult. That's a huge change. And the reason that's important is it's not a benign thing to say, well, I know my kid's gonna drink anyway, so they might as well drink in the basement. I've got their car keys, they're not going out, so I'll let my kids and their friends drink in the basement. If they're doing that as teenagers, they're gonna fall somewhere along that 50% line and that 7% line. And they do have an increased risk of alcohol use disorder later in life because of that permission to drink at home. So that's why we don't want to normalize that behavior in a young person whose brain is still developing.
14 is the average age of the first time a kid tries marijuana.
14, that's a middle schooler, just like me.
What I hear her talking about most in terms of drugs would be pot. That seems to be the most readily available, easily accessible. You hear about it everywhere. It seems like it just seems like it's all over the place.
It bothers me that kids are starting to think that it's okay because it's legal. It's not legal for a 14-year-old to do marijuana. If you start to get comfortable with that, you don't know what else you're gonna get comfortable with.
I think just having those open conversations about marijuana, even though it's legal, it is very dangerous and it is a gateway drug. It's something that was one of the first things that I did when I was young, and it took me down a very scary path.
Marijuana today is much, much stronger than it was, 10, 20, 30 years ago. It's a different kind of marijuana. It's a lot stronger. What we do know about marijuana is that the brain keeps developing until mid-20s, and marijuana has an effect on brain development. So I would warn parents about that.
We know that with chronic heavy use of marijuana, there's an associated decrease in graduating from high school. There's a decrease in entering college, and there's also, on average, a loss of 8 IQ points. As that person grows up and develops, there's a lower quality of life scale, meaning that people tend to be less happy with the life they have. They tend to experience more unemployment. They tend to have problems with job security. They tend to have problems with their career. They just feel that they haven't attained what they could have otherwise. And this is one of the corollaries, again, of early, regular marijuana use.
In high school, we did catch Justin smoking pot. And we did what we knew to do. We took away his freedom, we took away his car, we took away anything that was pleasant in his life. I drove him to work, I would pick him up from work, and that went on for a long time. But at some point, you have to let them go back out into the wild again. So he went away to college, and he did great. He was living in a dorm, and he was on the dean's list, and he was just having a great time along with doing great in school. Towards the end of his college career, I noticed that there were some changes going on. And I just kind of thought, well, it's that phase, the end of college, and he's trying to figure out who he is. It took him that 5th year to graduate, and I know that sort of has become the norm, but it wasn't for Justin. Well, he graduated from college and came home to live with us so that he could save some money while he got that first big job. And he did get a great job. He worked for a large company in their management training program. And he was doing great and he loved the job, but then that company went through a downsizing. And so he was one of the last ones in, so he was one of the first ones out. That brought him back home looking for a job. So that was fine, but I was noticing that I didn't see much movement. I didn't see him going out and having interviews. I didn't see that old pursuit that he used to have for excellence and for wanting to do the right thing. His hygiene started to change. I started really not to recognize who my child was. But one day I finally walked up to him and said, what's going on? What's going on with you? What's this big change? Is it drugs? Now, I said those words, but I did not expect to get the answer I got from him. When he said yes and I need help, I almost hit the floor.
Kids whose parents regularly talk to them about the dangers of drugs and alcohol are up to 42% less likely to use them. That is a huge number. You can almost cut your child's chances in half of using drugs or alcohol just by having regular conversations with them about the dangers of it.
Parents, since we know that drug use starts early on and we see it starting early on, talking to them early on about making good choices is what's important.
It's important because it's really laying that foundation, and we have to make sure that these conversations are age appropriate. So at that age, we're not talking to them about, heroin or what are certain drugs. We might just be talking to them about what are yummy and yucky things that we put into our bodies, and what are things that we do to keep ourselves healthy, so that we can really start to just lay that groundwork that these are conversations that parents and kids have, and these are things we talk about.
He knows that I'm in recovery, so our conversations kind of started like, what did that look like? So mommy was using drugs and alcohol, and it was extremely unhealthy lifestyle for her, and using drugs and alcohol can be very dangerous and even cause death.
The simple answers that might have satisfied a preschooler aren't going to satisfy a 4th and 5th grader. They're really going to want to know more. They're going to want to understand. They get it. And they don't want to hear about the value or the moral that's placed on decisions around substances, but they really want to understand the why, the science behind it. By presenting all that information, they're starting to understand that there's more to this than just how they might feel in the moments when they're using a substance, or the social impact of it, that it really is impacting their body and their ability to respond to decisions in their life.
Kids were having parties and parents were allowing them to have parties, and kids were drinking at those parties, 6th and 7th grade. So the earlier you can get on it, that's my recommendation. I mean, I started early with mine.
Just hearing them talk, it's like hearing, high school and college kids talk, even though they're only going into 8th grade. And that was a pretty big aha moment that, man, he's not a kid anymore.
A big important shift here from grade school to middle school is, in middle school, the chance that they're going to be exposed in a situation where they may be presented with using substances increases. So here the conversation shifts even from learning about substances to learning how to respond when someone says, hey, do you want to try this? Just continuing to empower them and encourage them to stay connected to the healthy things in their lives. So staying connected into healthy friendships and relationships, to sports, or kind of whatever they like to do.
Knowing who your kids are hanging out with, who their friends are, and what those friends and your kids are up to is really important, just to be able to understand their interactions, who they're surrounding themselves with, and what those people's day-to-day activities look like. As for parents, I think it's always beneficial to know the parents of your kids' friends. It's especially comforting, I think, to know when parents are on the same page as you are in terms of drugs and alcohol use.
At this point in their lives, I think it's just continuing to maybe build on some of those conversations that we had with them in middle school, continuing to talk with them about different substances, moving even beyond more typical substances like alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, and maybe start talking about risks of prescription medications and opioids and heroin and stimulants or ADHD medications or other types of drugs that they might have access to. An important role of parents, especially as we're getting into some of these older ages, is to also make sure they're educating themselves, doing some searches, talking to some experts about what are local drug trends, what, kind of are the things that young people are doing these days.
I am very worried about my son growing up and heading down a path of addiction just because of his family history. He has two parents that are both have been addicted to drugs and alcohol in their past, and so he is very aware of that situation. I'd like to keep that at the forefront of his mind because his likelihood of becoming addicted is a lot higher than others is.
The two factors that really lead to addiction are genetics, which accounts for about 50%, and then environmental factors, which account for the other 50%. It's so important, if you do have a family history of addiction, to put that out there, make your kids aware of it, and let them know that that can play a huge role in making them more susceptible to addiction.
The more research we do in this area, the more we see that there are specific genes related to substance abuse disorders. We've known from descriptive studies for decades that certain substances tend to run in families. For example, I think one of the strongest links is between a son and a mother. If the mother struggled with alcoholism, the son is more likely to display the same tendencies. Now there's even been genes that have been identified as having somebody being predisposed or vulnerable to an addiction. That's really important for families to talk about because it's just like diabetes, heart disease, other issues in healthcare.
We are a little more specific about what he could be facing, what he could be seeing, and quite frankly, the effects of what that could bring on him, not just because it could affect anyone negatively, but when you have, the gene pool that he has, and you're a little bit more maybe predisposed to that, you want to make sure you're educating him and saying, look, you could be out at a party or be out at a friend's house and someone could have something there and it could take one time and that could be a real problem for you.
Don't sugarcoat family history when it comes to substance use disorder. The same knowledge can be powerful because if you know about it, you can prevent it. If there's someone in your family that struggled with alcohol, struggled with cigarettes, struggled with other things, talk to your kids about that, because that's another way they can protect themselves when they have the opportunity or the offer of substances. They know to have a heightened sense of well-being and to be able to say, no, this isn't good for me because I know these things run in my family. Now that's about 50% of it. The other 50% is the environment in which you're in.
Environmental factors can include anything from how involved parents are to the friend group that the child surrounds themselves with, whether or not a child's being bullied, divorce, if they're suffering some sort of abuse at home or at school.
ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. This was something that developed out of the mid-'80s when a physician, Dr. Vince Felitti, ended up partnering through Kaiser Permanente, which was his employer, with the CDC. And that study has been going on now for decades and has really grown to take a look at the effect of adverse childhood experiences. There's about 10 ACEs that are routinely used now as a screen. These adverse childhood experiences have been correlated with many, many unhealthy outcomes in adults. The other piece that has gained popularity in this movement in the last few years is what we call a pair of ACEs. It's not only the adverse childhood experiences, but it's also the adverse community environment. What are the systemic problems in communities, in families, in society that give rise to the same kind of vulnerability, the ability for someone to feel like they're living in a constant state of stress? So we call that a pair of ACEs. If you think of it as a tree, what's under the soil are the adverse community experiences that give rise to the tree, and the tree can demonstrate the adverse childhood experiences. It shows how the two are related, what happens in an individual and in a family as a result of the exposure in a society to the negative experiences. But this is a very prolific area of research now, and these are things that we know that there's a linear effect on the number of ACEs and the severity of poor health outcomes. As the number of ACEs accumulate for young people, those young people are going to be in a state of elevated cortisol and stress hormones throughout their lives. So when we talk about the miscommunication of the brainstem and the frontal cortex, we know that that chemistry is dysregulated with the more ACEs that a young person has. And you couple the genetic piece with the environmental piece, and that can be a dangerous combination for young people growing up today.
I think teens have so many more stressors today than I did when I was a teen, a lot having to do with just never getting a break. When I used to come home from school and be at home, I had a break from all of the constant drama or the constant, so-and-so's here doing this and I'm not involved. Now with social media, everybody knows what everyone's doing all the time. They know if they're missing out on something. So it can just put a lot of stress and anxiety on these kids. More and more kids, research shows, are suffering from depression and anxiety, and those types of disorders create an unrest inside of them. And, it's really important nowadays, especially, to be aware of what your kids are going through. And if you do suspect that they might have some sort of mental health issue to get them the help that they need before they start to self-medicate in other ways.
They have fewer coping skills because they're in a heightened state of stress while they're awake. What they're going to naturally do is try to find a way to self-soothe. And self-soothing will often be getting liquor, getting street drugs, smoking marijuana, things that try to calm down or depress the central nervous system, because they're going to respond to the anxiety that they're living with all the time. Many of the people that come forward for treatment for substance use disorder do so because they have experienced toxic stress, trauma, abuse, neglect, something that has happened to them where they have turned to substances to soothe that. In fact, most communities in the United States, it's easier to buy a bottle of liquor than it is to get to an outpatient psychiatry appointment. And that sounds really simple, but a lot of people will self-medicate mental illness with substances, and that just spirals.
I think a lot about school,
friends, sports, social media,
pop culture, what people think of me, my grades,
YouTube, what's trendy, my parents, gaming,
what's happening this weekend, relationships,
bullying, anxiety, depression.
Am I a failure?
Do people like me?
Yeah, I'm always thinking about a lot of stuff.
Kids need to have healthy ways of relieving their stress. I think it's really important that parents talk to their kids about stress and let them know that stress is normal. It's a normal part of everyday life. And so just because a kid's stressed out doesn't mean that the world's coming to an end. Giving them tools to then deal with that stress in a healthy way is really important. So sitting down with your kids and saying, hey, if you feel stressed out, these are things you could do. Whether it's, go for a walk outside, go for a run, call a friend, reach out to the school counselor, call grandma, ride your bike over to the neighbor's house, to take your mind off things. Just coming up with a list specific to your child of ways that they can relieve their stress in a healthy way.
I want them to feel confident with themselves and know themselves, recognize their feelings. So I'm very focused now in their personality, their feelings, so they can they can know themselves and how to react to different situations.
Kids are faced with so much today, and sometimes they feel like they have to do things to be a part of something.
When I think about the number of kids today that are struggling with depression, anxiety, issues at home, homelessness, low income situations, it's not shocking then to think that they would try to seek out what they could in terms of helping them feel better. We know that kids today are using drugs and alcohol as a means to also self-cope with whatever it is that they're facing.
Not to sound corny, but there's not a lot of daydreaming anymore where you just kind of sit and stare out the window in a car ride. You're constantly on your phone and you're just continually getting this information fed to you from people who have various motives and why they're feeding it to you. And that's a stress, I think, for them that they don't even know they're feeling because it's just become so second nature to them. It's something that is more stressful than they think.
Social media is a good thing. It can be a good thing, but it can also intensify negative messaging, misinformation, and messages about what you are supposed to do as a young person. A lot of that information is wrong. A lot of it can be negative. That's why it's also important for parents to monitor screen time, to monitor phone use, to kind of get away from the electronics once in a while and to have time to calm down the messaging that young people get bombarded with.
We sat down as a family and said, well, we need to get on this right now. So Justin and I had been seeing a psychologist here in town. So I called the psychologist we had been seeing and said, Justin has told us that he has a drug problem. Tell me where to go. He sent us to a local rehab place, an inpatient stay for 2 weeks. When he came home, my husband and I had one of those bucket list trips to go on, and we decided that's okay, we'll go ahead and go. I was smart enough to know he shouldn't stay at home by himself. So he went to stay with my mom while we went to Italy, out of the country, far away. And that's where he relapsed. What do I do now? And I mean, I was at my wit's end. I just did not know what to do for my child. We chose a rehab facility in Arizona. So Justin went there willingly. He wanted to be better. This is when my husband and I really started to learn about addiction and what it does to a person, to your child, to their brain. He could no longer say no. The draw was too strong for him. It was either take the drugs or get drug sick. And that's what he was chasing right there. When Justin was clean and sober, he was his old self again. So after he had detoxed at this rehab and we got out there, this man walking towards me was my son again. We just couldn't have been more proud of him. So that was a 1-month stay, inpatient stay. And when he was ready to leave there, they recommended that he go to a sober living home. But they did not want him to come back to our hometown because of the triggers and the contacts, the people he knew here. So he went to Austin, Texas, to a sober living facility. So my husband and I went to visit him, and again, it was our son. He was back and he was happy and he was talking the talk and he was happy, very happy. So after the stay at the sober living, they then recommended step down sober living. But you have curfew and you are drug tested every day. And he was doing great in his job. He had made great friends. And it had now been just about the 1-year mark through rehab and sober living. And it was Christmas time. And my stepchildren live in Texas. And so we were all going to Justin's brother's house for Christmas, and Justin had permission to come see us from Austin. So he was there at Christmas. This is 2014. And he said, okay, guys, I want my life back.
The first kind of signs of substance use among teenagers can be a little confusing because a lot of times they just mirror teenage moodiness, right? But if you know your kid and you start to feel like they're out of sync and they just don't seem like themselves and these changes are new and different, it's something to start to worry about. So things like a change in a group of friends, or they're staying up all night and sleeping all day. They're sick a lot and don't want to go to school. Things like lack of hygiene. They stop taking care of themselves in that way. Or become more private, keeping their door closed all the time, not wanting you to come in, not wanting you to see their phone, things like that. I think the way you tell the difference between just teenage behavior and potential substance use is knowing your kid. And I think if you know your kid and you see a sudden change in their behavior, that's when you should be worried. Physical signs in their room or around the home can be really less obvious. A lot of times they're hidden in plain view. So it could just be common household items. Anything from a spoon missing from the kitchen that could be used to cook drugs, tea light candles. The corners of plastic baggies are often used to wrap drugs from a drug dealer. A scale hidden in the room. Burn marks on the bed or on clothing. There's many different physical signs of substance use that parents need to recognize.
If I found out that my child had used drugs or alcohol, I would have an open and honest conversation with him. I don't want to become, where it's me yelling at him about something. He needs to be able to feel comfortable sharing his experience with me, and maybe why did he do that and why did he make that decision, or what thoughts were going through his head before he did that.
I will be calm. I think you always have to be calm when these kind of things happen so they don't get scared or they trust you, but I would have a serious conversation with him about why he did it, what did he feel, if he liked it.
Set yourself apart. You be the person that you need to be. Be the example that you can still have fun and have a good time and do all the things you want to do without those other things in your life. You don't have to be that person.
I think if a parent starts to suspect drug use, they shouldn't wait. They should look around their kid's room. I always say that as long as my child is living under my roof, I have the right to look at whatever I want of theirs. And I do think that teenagers especially can earn a certain amount of privacy, but once you start to suspect drug use, you need to start checking it out right away.
His room is my room, and I would go through his room and find out if there was any paraphernalia there, anything that, would cause me to raise an eyebrow, and then I'd have that conversation with him about whatever I find.
I'd have all their passwords so I can get into it anytime I need to, and I sneak and do that. I think every parent should do that, and I wouldn't ever alert a child. It's one of those things you want to catch them off guard, and it's not to like set them up for a trap, but I don't want them to know so they can have a chance to delete or, remove history or whatever. You want to trust your kids, but you also want to monitor and make sure they're making the right decisions. So having their passwords and being able to get into everything that they have, it's key.
You also want that person to know that if they do use, it's okay to talk to you. You want that young person to know that your love for them does not depend on them being perfect. You don't want to cut off the lines of communication so that if a young person does use, they feel uncomfortable coming back to you. You don't want young people to feel like they are absolute failures if they cannot control all the urges and impulses that they have. Now, the best way to do that, let them know you love them, let them know they can always talk to you and speak to you, and you will be able to have the best type of conversation you need, regardless of what challenges that young people are having.
Well, in the school, it's all the way up to the hardest drugs, which I would consider to be heroin. And it's a shame, but it comes down to kids being bored, nothing to do, and parents and their parents having access to money. And when that happens, then it's parties that constantly happen, and it's always drugs and alcohol at those parties. One example is a kid got so drunk that they had to take him to the hospital to have his stomach pumped, and he was 13 years old. I just don't have words for that.
Today's drugs are much more potent. They're much more pure, and the price is cheaper than years ago. Drug dealers are also now lurking on the internet. They're lurking in cyberspace. They are accepting cryptocurrency and other electronic payments for drugs. They are utilizing not only the delivery methods or street corner hand-to-hand, but they are also utilizing parcel services such as the post office or a commercial service to deliver drugs right to your front door or to wherever you tell them to send it to.
I think a lot of parents right now are struggling specifically with vaping with middle schoolers because middle schoolers think it's safe, especially like a safe alternative to a cigarette. So a lot of parents are often asking, is vaping dangerous? Is it safe? Sometimes it's marketed as a cessation device, so does that mean that it's not dangerous? And what can I tell my kids to keep them from doing this? Because it's in every middle school bathroom in America.
There's many drugs that are available on the street that they are contaminants. They're not a pure substance. They're varying potency and strength. One of the scary things about fentanyl and the other opioid analogs on the market now is their potency can be 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin or 100 or more times stronger than prescription morphine. We don't have the studies to show the effects of those drugs yet.
Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, which is 50 times more potent than heroin. We have seen methamphetamine, we have seen cocaine and heroin, where fentanyl is added to those drugs at great quantities. And it's unknown to the user, and that causes many problems when the user thinks that maybe they're taking methamphetamine, but it's got a mixture of fentanyl and meth in it. I think over time, what I've seen and what I've learned is making that clear distinction and difference between the drug trafficker and the drug user. The drug trafficker is committing a crime. The drug trafficker is preying upon somebody with an illness. The drug trafficker is driven by greed. The drug trafficker doesn't care about your health and your safety. The drug user, the person that is suffering from addiction, they're suffering from an injury. And we need to treat the injury like we would treat any other injury, with a diagnosis, with a treatment plan, with support, with follow-up. And I believe that's something over time that I've come to learn. We want to reassure those children that law enforcement, teachers, parents, we're not here to get you in trouble. We want to get you out of the trouble that you're already in, your physical and health challenge that you're already in.
There are a lot of preventative measures that parents can take to help their kids. The first and most important is regular conversation about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. But there are also a lot of other tools that parents can put in their children's hands. One example would be practicing refusal skills. This means, for instance, sitting down with your child and coming up with a few things that he or she's comfortable using as an excuse should they be offered something. And it could be anything from, sorry, I'm on the basketball team and I'm not interested, to, I can't, my parents drug test me.
Some of the actions that I plan on taking as my kids get older to help them in situations where they could find themselves around drugs and alcohol are to give them opportunities to get out of those situations and to make me, maybe either the bad guy or the help to get them out of those situations. We drug tested him and just said, look, this is just something we're gonna do because we're gonna help you in situations, make us the bad guy, if you will, so that if you're in a situation where that presents itself, you can say, hey, look, my parents drug test me. I can't let this happen. I just can't let it happen because I'm gonna get drug tested. And now that we've actually done it, he can say it with a straight face and know that he's not lying.
So much to my kids' chagrin, I use Life 360 in terms of monitoring where they are physically. That just provides me with an opportunity to, when she comes home, if whatever her curfew might be, I can see when she came home versus staying awake necessarily.
There are also tools that you can help to give your kids so that they can have a quick exit strategy from a difficult situation. So with my kids, we call it the X plan. And basically, if one of my teens is in an uncomfortable situation, they know that they can just text me an X, and I will call within a minute or two and tell them that there's been a family emergency and that I'm coming to pick them up and that they need to leave where they are. This gives them an easy out, and then they can blame me and say, Mom, she's so annoying. She's coming to pick me up. I don't understand why I have to go. She said there's a family emergency. Put it on me. That way, it's an easy way for him to communicate with me without being embarrassed about it.
So in terms of trying to prepare my daughter for these parties, for these choices, one of the things I started very young telling her was that it's always better to call me. If you ever find yourself in a difficult situation where you don't feel safe or comfortable, you need to call me, you need to text me, continuing those conversations, just about making smart and safe choices. I don't want to be the mom with her head in the sandbox. I'm aware that kids are drinking. I'm aware that they're experimenting with vaping and some with doing drugs. I just have to hope that I'm instilling in my kids, we need to make smart, safe choices.
He idolized his brother and sister. He wanted their life, their wonderful careers, their beautiful marriages, and their beautiful children. And he just said, I'm ready. I've done all the work. I don't ever want to do that again. I won't do it again. I don't want that life. And he didn't. He honestly didn't. Justin turned 27 the end of January, and he moved out with his friend and got an apartment in Austin on February 27th. He was supposed to have come to Dallas for my daughter-in-law's father's funeral. And the day before the funeral, he was supposed to drive up and stay with us. And I had talked to him the night before, and that next day, I couldn't get a hold of him. He wouldn't text me back. He wasn't returning my calls. And I even said to my daughter-in-law's mom, I said, something's wrong, because that wasn't who he was. He always called me back. And it was about 10 o'clock at night. We were getting ready to watch a movie with my stepkids, my grandchildren. And the phone rang and it said, Austin. And I said, well, there he is, for heaven's sakes. He waited till 10 o'clock at night to give me a call. Well, it was a police officer from Austin to tell us that he had passed away. As soon as he said, I'm sorry to tell you, I threw the phone at my husband and just screamed and rocked. I fell to the floor. My stepson had to come in and just hold me. I was flailing. It's too much for a mother's brain to take. It's too much. And I lost it, completely lost it. One thing I miss a lot is his voice. And just about a year ago, my husband found something on his phone and it was Justin's voice. He sent it to me, and almost every night I listen to that. It's a short little sentence, and it doesn't make it better. It probably makes it worse, but I don't know how else to get a piece of him back. I lost my beautiful boy after all that work he did and put into it. This is the draw that drugs and alcohol have over our bodies. He couldn't say no to it. I couldn't believe it would happen to my child, but it can happen to yours. It did happen to mine. And I'm here to look every parent in the eye and say,
don't wait.
Don't wait.
Don't wait.
Don't wait.
Don't wait.
Don't wait.